Red Road, the king. We've managed to locate him this morning. Such good news. On the move. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again today on the virtual safari at Tinsalu. Please stay tuned for the end of the virtual safari, where we'll be doing a follow-up discussion of the treatment of the Naru pride, as well as answering some of your questions. Enjoy. Start our drive with a lovely shot of a hippo here, relaxing in the cool morning. Just flying by him, looks like what is a water thickney, a wader bird. So a wader bird, as you can picture, maybe imagine wading in the water, bare legs, long bare legs. And it's got almost a spear-like beak to grab its prey, insects and vertebrates, small fish. As for our hippo friend here, he would go out during the evenings to graze. And they use their lips, not their teeth, but their lips to grip on the grass and bring it into their mouths. Look at those tusks. Aren't those impressive? Big elephant bull. Can weigh up to 6 tons. Don't think this guy's quite at 6 tons. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say maybe between 4.5 and 5. It's not fully grown, even though those tusks are very impressive. Red Road, the king. We've managed to locate him this morning. Such good news. On the move. As always, here comes the sun. Brilliant to see them healthy and walking about. Sun seems to be looking healthy as well. The big boys making their way across the plains towards the water's edge. Looking at his stomach, doesn't look like they did manage to grab anything last night to make a kill. I suspect also the fact that they are drinking water now would also suggest that. otherwise they would get much of the moisture that they need from the blood. When he looks this way, there we go, profile. To me it looks like there's still a bit of swelling there, but I think the swelling around the eyes, from what I can tell, looks a bit better. Let us know what you think. Something's piqued his interest. So cat's vision, obviously quite different from ours. We have what we call a yellow spot, where we have a lot of cones focused, or concentrated, sorry. And they do not have such a singular spot. They have predominantly rods, so light-sensitive, the light-sensitive parts of their eyes to pick up images of pick up light, sorry. The rods as opposed to the cones, they have more rods, and they aren't concentrated in a circle like ours. Their concentration of those receptors are horizontally placed within their eye. So now what that means is that they can see things on the horizon. Any changes on the horizon really stand out for them. Whereas you think about our eyesight, everything that's central is hyper-focused. In fact, our ability to see an image is 10 times sharper than that of a lion. Now, of course, they can see a lot better at night. Because they have a lot more rods than cones, that is the reason that the images they see are not as sharp as ours. Interestingly, Red Road has stayed here out in the open, still scanning the horizon, and his son has gone off into the bushes on the left of him. His son was constantly looking back to see where Red Road was, if he was following him. And I wonder if this is a part of a hunting strategy, or maybe they are following the scent of the females. There he is, keeping Red Road in his sight. Okay, we're gonna leave the sighting for the time being. Let some of the other operators enjoy it, because this is mutle, as they would say in Shangaan, the local language here. Beautiful. I think everyone who can deserves to have a sighting like this. Great news, everybody. They're in the distance there, and hopefully you can make them out. But there are at least 2 members of the Naru pride, 2 female adults. I don't currently see Red Rowan and his son, but I have a feeling they are nearby, and that this was the sense that they were following. As I'm sure you can tell, the wind has picked up quite a bit, and it is a very cool day at the moment. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stick around with these guys. I'm going to wait it out here in the hopes that we can catch some activity, a bit of action. Well, fingers crossed for that. You never know out here in the bush. Might just be a lovely long wait with the pride of lions. But there are worse ways to spend your day. Aha, look who we have here. Just lay down. The males are about 50 meters to the left of the females. So certainly who they were trailing, confirmed. I've repositioned myself to get both the male and the females into shot. I succeeded at getting a different angle, but they are quite far off. Little dots over there. That's them, I promise. Alright, Naru Pride, hopefully we'll see you a bit later. On a rainy evening, I'd like to reflect on the treatment of the Naru Pride, or the day spent treating them. When we first got the call, and I heard that it was about anthrax, I think mixed feelings is a good description, because I know the reputation of anthrax. You do, if you work out in the bush here, you do have to know about it. And I've never worked with it before. I feel extremely privileged and lucky to have been a part of it. And this is something I've wanted to do all my life, to be out here filming wildlife, narrating for it, just a cherry on the top. I hope I'm doing an okay job so far. And then my colleague Paul down in Cape Town, he's a wildlife filmmaker as well, and he edits our work. And I'm sure he's going to be picking it apart, giving some constructive feedback there. So, bear with me here. It's only going to get better over time. Hello everyone, and thank you once again for joining us today for the follow-up discussion on the treatment of the Naru Pride. We're going to briefly chat about anthrax, the conservation status of lions, intervention versus non-intervention, and then finally answer some of those pressing questions that you've all been asking. Thank you very much for those. As mentioned previously, anthrax is a disease caused by a bacteria. It is endemic to the Kruger National Park, and that is the area which we are located as well, in the Greater Kruger. The spores of anthrax can survive in the soil for years, and during the dry season, that's when the herbivores feeding on the grass and the leaves are the main conduits. So carnivores can become infected by predating on these herbivores, and an infection can be cutaneous, in other words through the skin, through a cut in the skin for example, and the spores can also be inhaled or ingested. And it's likely that we saw all 3 of these kinds of infections with the lions, given the swelling, the liquid coming out of the lungs, and the fact that they had made a recent kill. So I wasn't able to find any hard numbers, but luckily for lions, their anthrax survival rate is better than that of the herbivores. We're obviously very interested in the conservation of lions. So what is their conservation status? Lions are currently rated as threatened as opposed to endangered. An endangered species is one that faces a very high risk of extinction in the wild, while a threatened species, like lions, is likely to become endangered if current trends continue. So this is a good lead up to our next topic, intervention versus non-intervention. And for this, I would like to use a real-world working relationship between a conservationist friend of mine and his partner, his veterinary partner at the NGO that they run. I haven't asked their permission, so I'm going to call them Chris and Thabo for the time being. Chris is a vet and Thabo a conservationist. So they face dilemmas like we faced recently almost daily, and they come from very different schools of thought. Chris is a vet and he knows how to help individual animals, and he likes to do that. Whereas Thabo, the conservationist, looks at the broader picture. He likes to look at the threats to the overall population and things like genetic diversity. So their conversation around the Naru pride, hypothetically, would have been as follows. Chris, the vet, would say, if we have the time and the resources, we should intervene and help these lions. It's not their fault that the infected buffaloes got into the area. And then Thabo, the conservationist, would potentially say, lions in the Greater Kruger National Park currently do not face an existential threat, and that there's a chance that some of the infected lions will survive. And it's their anthrax-resistant genes that we need to eventually spread throughout the population to help future lion populations survive this disease. So what they would have ended up doing in this case would have been anyone's guess. But my point here is that Chris and Thabo have very different viewpoints, and they are able to remain good friends and perform excellent work for wildlife conservation. So that being said, personally, I will not chastise the reserves have chosen a different approach to the ones that management took here, because in the end, there's no definitively right answer. And then finally, onto some of the other pressing questions. And thank you very much for these. Were the vets and others not at risk of infection? What was done with the carcass of the lion that passed? Why do you cover the animal's eyes when they are darted? And why weren't the cubs treated? The vets and others involved were certainly at risk, but precautions were taken. The vets have a lot of experience with dealing with anthrax. Gloves were worn at all times by people handling the lions, and their hands were regularly disinfected. And the carcass of the dead lion was moved to another area, as there was risk that the water would become contaminated. And then, because extreme heat can kill anthrax, the body of that poor lioness was burnt. So the lions were blindfolded during the procedure to prevent eye damage. So an animal's eyes will often remain open while under anesthetic, but because the normal blinking reflex and tear production is significantly reduced while they are under the anesthesia, they could potentially develop vision-threatening corneal ulcers. What been on almost everyone's mind are the cubs. Why weren't they treated? Well, the cubs did not look infected. They certainly were vulnerable to the anthrax, that is true. They were not treated because the vets are limited by our most precious resource, time. You'll remember that we started in the morning and we finished at sunset. So given the limited amount of time, the lions were treated in terms of priority for the longevity of the pride, starting with the breeding females first, the breeding males second, and if possible, only then can you get to the sub-adults and then finally the cubs. It is of course heartbreaking to have to make these kinds of decisions, but sub-adults, they cannot breed, and the mortality of lion cubs, as heartbreaking as it is around 80%. That's all we have time for today. We'll continue to monitor the Naru Pride and Red Road, keep trying to track them down, see how they are all doing. And yeah, we'll keep you posted, we'll keep you updated. So thank you so much again for joining us today, for your support, your questions, your comments, and please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and to share it with your family and friends. From myself, Charlie, and the virtual safari at Tinsalu, it's goodbye for now.